You ever got that one movie where you like it just fine, but everyone else seems to just hate it to no end? Yeah, we all have those movies. In fact, I got 10 of them, and I'm about to share them with you right here. So the important thing to know is that I don't think any of these movies are perfect by any extent, far from it in some cases. But you know what? They're still fun and they're still enjoyable, and at least better than the general public gives them credit for, you know? So, here we go. The top 10 films that everybody hates, but I just can't help but liking. Number 10, The Wiz. Yeah, this one kind of seems disastrous from the beginning, doesn't it? Late 70s picture, Motown Records, based off of a fairly influential play, but directed by Joel Schumacher. Uh-oh. So for those who aren't aware, The Wiz is basically The Wizard of Oz, but black. Instead of things like Follow the Yellow Brick Road, it's Ease on Down the Road, stuff like that. It's funky, it's spunky, it's The Wiz. This one stars Michael Jackson as the Scarecrow and Diana Ross as Dorothy. A lot of the complaints at the time were that it does deviate a lot from the script, which it does, but not as heavily as everyone says, I must say. They say the casting was bad, which I thought that Michael Jackson was fantastic as the Scarecrow, as everyone else seems to agree. Everyone says that Jackson was easily the best part of this movie. In fact, Jackson went on to say this was one of the few times in his life he was truly happy. Sad, isn't it? Diana Ross is miscast as Dorothy because, they age her up quite a bit in this. But for what it's worth, she does a good job with the character she was given, albeit not actually really resembling Dorothy. Nipsey Russell does an alright job as the Tin Man, although his voice does get a little annoying. Ted Ross as the Lion was fantastic. The Witch, I think, was a little miscast. Richard Pryor, while not great as the Wizard, he did capture his kind of desperate, pathetic nature. Then there's the music. The music is fantastic. While yes, there are some deviations from the original score, it does sound amazing, especially the Ease on Down the Road versions. The look of the film is what I can describe as David Lynch, but family friendly, for the most part. Yeah, there's some odd visuals in here, and yeah, they try to make it like ghetto Wizard of Oz, which I see what they're going for, and it does work a lot of the time, but there are some times where it's just like, alright. So it's a very mixed bag here, but with the fun songs and some of the great performances in here, albeit very mixed, it does turn out to be an interesting, fun ride. Check it out if you wanna. It's become widely available recently thanks to the revival they had a few years back. But, that's that. Number 9, Summer Rental. On paper, this film sounds fantastic. It's written by the late great John Hughes. It stars the late great John Candy. What more do you want? These people have collaborated before in fantastic movies like Uncle Buck and The Great Outdoors. So why doesn't this one get all the credit? Besides, those other two films are widely beloved. Well, there's something about this film. A lot of people say it's flat and it's lifeless. Well, yes, it's not as flowing as, say, The Great Outdoors, or not as funny as Uncle Buck. I think comparing it to those films is what gives it its bad reputation. Because on its own, it's not fantastic, but it is pretty dang funny. There's a lot of one-liners in there that I think are just fantastic. I don't want to ruin too many, but I'll just give one away here. One of the big jokes is that the summer house that they're going to, as this film is about a family that's just trying to have the best summer vacation ever, they rent a house and they think it's fantastic. It's this big opulent mansion in the woods. However, it turns out they actually went to the wrong house, and the real owners come to claim it. So, John Candy, who plays the lead character, brings his daughter down from the stairs as they're about to leave, and she says, "Daddy, I wet the bed." And then he says, No, sweetie, you didn't wet your bed. You wet their bed." Stuff like that. It's just a bunch of little stuff like that, or when he turns to the neighbors and says, "Hey, I'm so-and-so, and you are?" And then they reply with, "Having lunch." It's just a couple little lines like that. Like I said, not fantastic, and the plot certainly is a bit choppy. It's more of like a bunch of summer-themed vignettes, rather than actually a real cohesive story. So I guess it's kind of like The Great Outdoors in some extent. But like I said, comparing it to those classics is kind of what gives Summer Rental a bad name. Check it out if you like those films, so I think you'd like this one. Number 8, The Cable Guy. The film that almost destroyed Ben Stiller's directing career and almost destroyed Jim Carrey's acting career. This film was panned when it came out, despite being a moderate success. A lot of people said it was creepy, it was dark, it was disturbing, it was not like what Jim Carrey should play. At the time, I can totally get the hate, because Jim Carrey was known for a lot of other more lighthearted adventures like Ace Ventura, which I'll talk about someday, and he was certainly not known for playing these disturbing, twisted parts. However, now, Jim Carrey is not really as much of a comedic actor as we remember him to be. He's taken on a lot more serious roles like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, you know? So it's not so hard to see him in this kind of role. And for what it's worth, not amazing humor, but still good, and the story is actually really interesting. It's about this insane, maniacal cable guy who just wants friends, and he was raised by TV, so he doesn't know how to interact with society. So he's annoying Matthew Broderick to no end because he thinks that they're best buds, but Broderick just wants his old life back. Basically, it's like if 1 Hour Photo with Robin Williams tried to be a comedy. And while it doesn't work nearly as well as 1 Hour Photo in either the story or the humor, what little 1 Hour Photo had, it definitely makes for a pretty interesting story and a decent comedy. So check it out. Maybe your views will change. Number 7, Rock-a-Doodle. Yes, this was made by Don Bluth, the guy who made Secret of NIMH, Land Before Time, All Dogs Go to Heaven, American Tail, and Titan A.E. Albeit Titan A.E. not held in very high regard, but I liked it. But that seems to be what makes people hate Rock-a-Doodle. Now, I'll admit, this film is definitely flawed. Absolutely. I would have loved to see the original cut, because apparently before it was released, the studio wanted to cut it up a bit and make it more commercial friendly. Kind of like what happened to The Thief and the Cobbler a bit, although not nearly as bad as what happened to that. Basically, more narration was added, a couple scenes were cut, and some characters were slightly redesigned. What is this film about? Well, let's just go way back first. It was originally about a fairy tale, like what Disney did. There was this fairy tale about a rooster that would make the sun rise by crowing. So Disney was going to do something like that, whether it be a film or a short, sources conflict on that. But then Don Bluth ended up taking it over and kind of decided to contemporize it a bit and make it so that the rooster would sing to make the sun rise. He wanted to make a lot more of a lighthearted feature this time around, and one that included live action, which he said if he enjoyed live action as much as he did animation, he would do that full time. And then, according to the behind-the-scenes features, he said he ran right back to his drawing board on day one because of how stressful live action was. And yeah, it seems like a lot of people have, like, every single problem with this. They don't like the music, they don't like the animation, they don't like the story, they don't like that it's from Don Bluth, the guy who made all these other dark films. Let's tackle these. Animation. I still think it looks nice. Yeah, it's more bright and colorful than, say, his other films. Until A Troll in Central Park, and Thumbelina and the Pebble and the Penguin and Anastasia and Bartok the Magnificent. But at this point, it's more colorful and vibrant. But I still think it looks nice. It's still Don Bluth, no matter what. Even if his films are garbage like Troll in Central Park, it still looks good. The songs sound good, and they're sung very well. It's just sometimes the lyrics aren't so great. Mostly when it comes to the villain songs or the bouncer songs. But anything sung by Chanticleer, voiced by the late great Glenn Campbell, it sounds great. And it's actually pretty well written too. Besides, I think this is the only film you can see with an Elvis chicken song. And now let's talk about the thing everyone hates. The fact that this lighthearted, fun family adventure was made by Don Bluth. He doesn't just have to do dark things, guys. Let him do what he wants. It's like what we just talked about with Jim Carrey. He doesn't have to just do one thing his whole life. He can branch out and do other things. I understand that he's got a style, and that's what he's most known for, especially at this time when this was the first one to really break from that. But it's okay to try something new. And I guess this is kind of what led to the big bombs of Pebble and the Penguin, Thumbelina, and Troll in Central Park. But that shouldn't really be held for this movie, I guess. I mean, it's still a fine movie in and of itself. Although, yes, I guess that stigma is kind of there, that it did breach into some unfortunate ground. Still, it's flawed, but it's fun. Check it out. Maybe you'll have a different opinion. I hope so. Number 6. Wagons East. Everyone hates this movie. Everyone hates it. I don't know why. It has a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes. Approval rating from audiences is just low. Nothing but panning and hatred and anger. John Candy's last film, and everyone agrees that it is a terrible one to go out on. Except me. I don't agree with that. I think this film is hilarious. The plot is weak, although it does have an interesting premise. It's basically about a bunch of pioneers that headed west after, the Oregon Trail, and they're not really satisfied with their life, so they want to go back east. So they get this old wagon guy to lead them back. And it's basically just a bunch of vignettes from there. It's like Summer Rental again. There are a couple issues, like some jokes not really landing, and some of the parts where it tries to take itself too seriously, like with the wagon leader and the prostitute's romance. Those don't really land as much. And some of the jokes go on a little long, and there are some story issues, but that's for a pretty understandable reason. You see, John Candy died while filming this, so they had to kind of remove a couple things and cut some stuff together to make the film flow. So while it doesn't necessarily excuse it, it definitely does provide an accurate reason. But everything else seems to land pretty well. The characters are fun and quirky. The humor, for the most part, is very lively, fun, energetic, and just a little bit cynical. It feels like one of those old spoof movies, kind of. Like Airplane, but toned down a bit. Why do people seem to hate it, though? It more just seems like they're just kind of bitter about it for some reason. They say it doesn't really land and that the humor is weak and that the characters are bland. Okay, first of all, in comedies, characters usually are bland. That's just a thing. Other than that, I can only really say that humor is subjective. I will not at all call this one of the greatest films ever made, and certainly not one of John Candy's best. But 0% on Rotten Tomatoes? Why? It's really funny. Funnier than Summer Rental, I'd say. And that one doesn't have a 0. So, let's hope that this thing will get a better reputation sometime soon. Number 5, Meet the Robinsons. I'm gonna be honest, this is one of my favorite Disney films. I know it's not perfect, and I wouldn't say this is the best Disney film, but it's one of my favorites for many reasons. A lot of people don't like that it's weird and that the story doesn't flow very well, which, admittedly, the second act is just kind of a big setup for the TV show they were planning. And it's kind of obvious, but I like the rest of it, and even then, that second act is still pretty fun. You get to see all these crazy, quirky characters, some really energetic animation, and some brilliant concepts. So yeah, let's talk about that humor. The villain of this film, or at least one of the villains, the bowler hat guy, is right up there with Captain Hook as one of the best comedic villains. Everything that comes out of this guy's mouth has me laughing hard. Like when he wants to turn the main character Lewis into a duck, he says, "Yes, I'll turn him into a duck, it's so evil!" But I don't know how to do that. I don't even really need a duck. It's a bunch of stuff like that. It's all the time, constantly. And he plays it up in such a hammy way. It's like Plankton, but like dumber. Characters are lovable, the animation is great, and the story can be a little predictable, but what I really like is the message that ties into the story of never giving up and keep going on. This is a very, very important lesson for anybody in life. Because, especially with this oversensitive generation, they kind of want to give up whenever someone criticizes them or whenever something gets hard, but the important thing is that when you fail or when you face obstacles, it's a learning experience. Sure, it doesn't always work out, that's not how life works, but just keep moving forward and learn from your mistakes. The only way you can go is up. The emotional moments that ring with this message are very, very poignant. And honestly, the ending kind of gets me choked up a little bit. Like I said, it does have some issues, but I just can't help but love it. When it comes to my personal favorite Disney films, this is really high up there. Like I said, I wouldn't consider it one of the best, but I do consider it one of my favorites. Number 4, Song of the South. This film is not racist. It's not racist. I will say it, and say it, and say it, and say it, and say it. This film is not racist. This film is not racist. You know why? This film is meant to speak out against racism. I've spoken about this before, but I'll talk about the plot again. A young boy during Reconstruction times, not slave times, Reconstruction, they mentioned President Johnson a few times, and that's not Lyndon Johnson. He wasn't around at the time when this film came out. A boy during Reconstruction times is stuck on a plantation in Georgia because his father has to go do something for a newspaper he works at. So he just kind of grows up, learns about life, while talking to Uncle Remus, a former slave, who tells a whole bunch of interesting stories about characters like Brer Rabbit, Brer Fox, and Brer Bear. These tales coincide with what's happening in real life with the boy, and he grows up and learns from these lessons. However, as Reconstruction is ending, there's still a little bit feelings of lingering racism, like how Uncle Remus and the rest of the former slaves are not allowed in the house, which is a big poignant moment at the end. Keep in mind, I'm emphasizing Reconstruction and former slave. because everybody thinks this takes place right during or before the Civil War. It doesn't. It says in the beginning it's Reconstruction, and it mentions President Johnson all throughout. Andrew Johnson was president during Reconstruction. And with those moments at the end where they're fighting against racism, and the big poignant emotional moment is Uncle Remus being treated as an equal, of course. Yeah, there's some uncomfortable language in there, like, I'm not gonna outright say it. It's no N-words, but let's just say there's a couple slang words that are in there. But two things, that's how people talked back then, and that's not from the actual script itself, that's from the stories. Because the Brer Fox, Brer Rabbit, Brer Bear, all those stories, those were written at the actual 1800s times. And almost word for word are brought into this film. So yeah, those may be a little uncomfortable, but it's not the worst. And the film is charming, it's got some amazing songs like Zippity Doo Dah. The animated segments are great, and while the live action segments, the main film, is a little bit slow and a little bit meandering sometimes, it does have kind of a laid-back, gentle story, and it's charming in its own Disney way. And hey, I can watch this during my Disney boycott because they're not going to release this anytime soon, legitimately. But why does everyone think that Song of the South is some sort of racist propaganda thing that's equivalent to something like Scrub Me Mama with a Boogie Beat? Well, let me answer that. When the film was being re-released, because this was before video and such, some journalist who didn't really see it caught wind of it and then realized, in his own words, that this thing was actually racist, as it lightened slavery and made it seem more fun and acceptable, and used a bunch of racist lingo. Now the lingo, again, not great, but sometimes gets a little uncomfortable, but it's understandable given that it just takes it word for word from the original story. And there's only like one or two in the whole film, and they're not even that bad. I have a couple African American friends who've seen this and aren't affected by it in the least. And then he ended up publishing his uninformed review, and then word got around, and then a bunch of misinformation spread, and then Song of the South was never seen again. Honestly, I think Eddie Murphy being cast as a Chinese dragon is more offensive than this. And I don't even find that offensive. Song of the South needs its justice. People need to realize that this thing is okay. I mean, if you release it with one of those openings saying, oh, racism is bad, sure, whatever, go right ahead. It's something Disney would probably do anyway. But it's certainly not something to be ashamed about, and especially not something you should make a theme park ride about if you are ashamed about it. Looking at you, Splash Mountain. Number 3 is Spider-Man 3. It's not perfect at all. Venom is absolutely wasted in this film. Emo Peter can be a bit much. Tries to do a bit too many things, and Mary Jane is still kind of a pain. Although not as much of a pain as she is in the other films. But other than that, it's just like those other Spider-Man films. It's fun, it's exciting, although it gets a little bit darker. Especially with the Sandman stuff. The Sandman is probably the highlight of this film. His storyline and how he's actually really sympathetic, with the exception of the way that his story ends, being that it doesn't. He is the standout character in this film. What little we do get to see of Venom is certainly exciting. The whole concept of the new Green Goblin was pretty well handled, I believe. Mary Jane actually gets to have a personality. Peter also develops more personality aspects. And we get some more info on Uncle Ben's passing. And the stuff with the symbiote suit is actually pretty good. Granted, I have read a couple of the comics and it was tackled better there, but with the exception of some of the dream sequences or some of the struggles that he goes through, they picked some of the really best parts to emphasize. And it really demonstrates that he is struggling with what's essentially this kind of addiction. I can definitely understand why people don't like it. As I've said, this thing is not perfect, it's got quite a few problems with it. But, you know what? The other Spider-Man films aren't perfect either. The dialogue in the first one is unbelievably hokey, have we forgotten that? And the romance in Spider-Man 2 is just embarrassing. So I think these films are allowed to have their flaws. Spider-Man 3 does as well, but I like it in spite of it. Number 2, Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith. Now, this one isn't really hated so much anymore now that a lot of people seem to be coming out and saying that they like it. However, general consensus is that all the prequels are terrible. Which, yeah, Phantom Menace is not good, and Attack of the Clones I'd probably say is the weakest of all the Star Wars films. Yes, even lower than The Last Jedi. Although I haven't seen Solo, and I'm not gonna either. Anyways, I like Episode 3. I feel like this is probably the episode, in the prequels at least, that fits most with the Star Wars universe. Now that's something that the prequel films never struggled with, which 7 and 8, in my opinion, do, is fitting in with the Star Wars universe. The prequels didn't struggle with that. But this one really didn't. This really felt right at home with episodes 4, 5, and 6. And yeah, some of the lines in here aren't fantastic, but there actually are some pretty good things. Like some of the lines that aren't cringy. And I know that the Darth Plagueis scene is memed to death, but I still think that is a very good scene. It's quiet, it's effective, but it also kind of gives you this ominous feeling. The action scenes are well done, the CG is marginally better. No Jar Jar. Hayden Christensen is getting way better as being Anakin, although not fantastic. He's still definitely a lot better than he was in episode 2. He's come a long way from his Goosebumps days, hasn't he? We get some good story, some good action, some good lore. And yeah, like I said, there are flaws, but certainly not as many flaws as, "Are you an angel?" or, "I hate sand. It's rough, coarse, irritating, and it gets everywhere." At least we don't get any outright groaner lines like that. We also get to see some new iconic characters, like General Grievous. Who doesn't love that guy? And it provides a nice bookend into episode 4. It flows very nicely. So yeah, I actually really enjoy episode 3. With the no's aside, I think this is a pretty dang solid film. Sadly, it has the prequel stigma, so a lot of people drag it down. But still, I enjoy it and I encourage you to give it another shot. It's probably better than you remember it. Now, number 1 I have talked about ad nauseum. I have talked about it over and over and over and over again. And I'm going to talk about it once more because dang it, this thing needs to be more respected. My number 1 film that everyone hates that I absolutely love, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I made a little error in the beginning that I said none of these films are perfect. This one is near perfect. With the exception of some of the weird parts at the end, I'd honestly say this is a near perfect film. I grew up with the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory book. I loved it. So when I saw Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory as a kid, I liked it, but I was frankly kind of disappointed. That thing has almost nothing to do with the book. It changes everything. So when this film came out, I saw it the first week it came out, and I loved it because it was book to screen almost. The only added things were added from Roald Dahl's real life with his struggles with his father. Other than that, pretty much everything they say comes directly from the book, maybe slightly reworded. So that alone is already better, and let me talk about some of the things people hate. It has nothing to do with Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. No kidding. It's not a remake, it's another adaptation of the book. That exists. That's like saying the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films are remakes of the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings film because they're both Lord of the Rings. No, they're separate adaptations of the book. That's how it works. Roald Dahl was very famously furious with Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory and did everything he could to tell people to not see it. Which, yes, he is credited for writing it, but that's because they ditched his script, yet still credited him. And he was not happy about that at all. People say they don't like Willy Wonka. Well, okay. Then I guess you won't like the book's version either. Willy Wonka is not at all supposed to be a sly, smooth gentleman. He's supposed to be weird, he's disturbing, he's maniacal even. Because don't forget, this is a guy who's only really been talking to Oompa Loompas for about 20 years. And in this film, yeah, he's creepy, he's sadistic, he's absolutely bizarre. So it fits perfectly. People don't like the Oompa Loompas. Oompa Loompas are people, not aliens. They're, in the book it says they're just people but smaller. They're not orange, they're not green-haired. Granted, they did that because the original Oompa Loompas in the book had a lot of blackface connotations because that was acceptable at the time, I guess. So they made them kind of look wild and crazy because they wanted to distance themselves from that. But still, in the books to this day, it just says that they're small people. The ones in the old film don't look like small people. I mean, okay, they look like small people, but they look more like small aliens. These look like people. You can prefer one or the other, but by saying that these don't look like Oompa Loompas, I don't really see it. There's other things that I really like about this. Honestly, I like the songs better. Don't get me wrong, I love the songs in the original. Cheer Up Charlie, I Got a Golden Ticket, the Oompa Loompa songs. I adore those songs. But speaking on just an artistic level, I kind of feel that these songs are better. For one, it's not a musical, and the songs only come in when they enter the factory, which I think was a very good artistic choice, which was in the book. being that Wonka's factory is just some kind of crazy wonderland where songs can just happen. It's not just a musical throughout. I think that kind of gives it its kind of weird, quirky edge. And the Oompa Loompa songs aren't just the same song over and over, slightly reworded, and maybe the tempo slightly changed. No, they go through different decades of music and have different expression and moves and visuals, and it's actually really, really exciting. And just genuinely good to listen to. Like I said, I like both songs, but still. The characters are more developed here, because let's go over the characters, at least of the ticket winners in the original. Augustus Gloop likes to eat. Veruca is annoying. Violet is kind of rude, and Mike TV likes TV. I'll save Charlie for later. In this one, Augustus is a sly, uppity stick-in-the-mud who just loves nothing more than eating and does not care at all about what anyone says or how anyone feels. Violet is this brainwashed, I must win at everything, I am the best, me, pretty much pet child for her mom. Veruca is a lot less annoying here and is actually a bit more clever with the way she wants it. Rather than being loud and shrieky, she's more using cuteness and charm as her manipulation, as described in the book. And Mike TV is actually a bad kid here. One of my problems with the original is that Mike TV was a little mouthy, sure, but by all means, he wasn't that bad. I'd hang out with him. In this one, he's just soulless. He's evil. He's grumpy. He doesn't care. He has no emotions except anger. And that makes for more interesting characters. Charlie does get a lot of flack in this film because he's not really substantial. He's just kind of a good kid. For one, that's how he's described in the book, as just a good kid with nothing special about him. That's because he's supposed to be pretty much a self-insert character, not for Roald Dahl, but for the audience. You're supposed to watch and picture yourself in Charlie's place. Like, let's look at Timmy Turner from The Fairly OddParents. He's very weak when it comes to being a character, but that's because we're supposed to imagine ourselves in his place. Sure, that doesn't really excuse the fact he's kind of bland, and on paper, the Charlie character in the original Willy Wonka version, at least, is considered to be a stronger character. I kind of just find this one more charming, and I love the Grandpa Joe in this one a lot more. I could go on, and on, and on, and on, and I have done that before, but I'm just going to cut it off here. If you don't know what else I'm going to say, well, I've got about a 2-hour video buried somewhere here on this channel explaining why Charlie is better than Wonka. So, I urge you to go out and see that if you want to see more. And that was my list of the top 10 films that everybody hates but I love. Next week, we're doing the opposite. The top 10 films that I hate but everyone else loves. Stay tuned.